All right, so I'm going to introduce the next moderator for the next panel. Arturo Flores is he joined the Huntington Park Council in 2022, and then his peers on the council selected him to serve as the mayor this March 2025. Arturo Flores is the son of immigrant parents from Zacatecas, and he's one of 10 children raised by a single mother and an EIU Local 99 member. So his personal journey really includes his own experiences in foster youth, embodies the resilience and determination of immigrant families. And I got to also just add, he'll say more, I hope. He's also a former Marine who served some tours of duty. So Arturo Flores has got the whole package. Arturo, the panel is yours. Introduce your members.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for Professor Dowell Myers here, who's also my professor. I'm doing my master's in urban planning at USC. So a round of applause for Professor Dowell. Thank you so much. And I want to first and foremost welcome all of you guys for taking time to be here. I walked in this morning. I was sitting in the back. I didn't want to interrupt the first panel, so I have been sitting in on the previous panels. All of the information that's being presented, critical to a lot of the decisions that policymakers are going to make, but also to the folks that are on the ground, the planners, the staffers, the analysts. And so I want to thank everybody that's taken a part in the previous panels, but also everybody for being here and for taking this knowledge. And I hope that the knowledge you take here today, you take and you apply it into your field and to shaping the future for this nation, for this country, and for local municipalities. So thank you guys so much. With that being said, I'll roll into presenting my panel. We have an amazing panel here today. My first panelist is Michael Bracken of DMG Economics, who is an economist with SCAG's Economic Roundtable. Round of applause for Michael. Up next, we have Miriam Jordan, National Immigration Correspondent for the New York Times. Round of applause for Miriam as well. And last but certainly not least, Manuel Pastor, Director of Equity Research Institute at the University of Southern California. Round of applause for Manuel as well. So with that being said, the name of this panel is The Role of Immigration in Southern California's Workforce. Now, I know that, this issue can be hyper politicized and at times is a very, very politically charged issue. However, today the conversation that we're going to be having is around its impact around California's workforce. So a lot of the information you're going to receive today will be as a very matter of fact. And with that being said, we'll roll into Michael.
Well, good morning. Let me see if we get this working. There we go. All right. First of all, let me go through how we're going to do this. And again, I appreciate the mayor's words. And I also talked with Comey about this. This is not the easiest of topics to be talking about. And quite frankly, if you're an economist, it's a lot easier to punt and say, I'm not available that day. So I'm going to talk to you about my biases here for a second. Every one of us in this room have biases, and I think a good economist will tell you what their biases are and kind of how they see the world. I'll give you some statistical information about kind of the intersection of immigration and the economy. I'm going to talk about the mess we're in, and I'm going to talk about the fix. Now, I've told Comey I'm probably going to upset people twice, the first of which is this. I'm a native of San Diego. Go Padres.
You totally lost the crowd.
Exactly. Politically, I'm a declined state. I tend to be fiscally conservative. I don't believe you should spend more money than you have. Socially, I'm a libertarian. I don't care what you do in your bedroom, but you get to stay out of mine as well. I'm a big believer in safety nets. We're the wealthiest country in the world. The people in this room are kind of some of the wealthiest in this nation. So you help out fellow man as you can. I personally sit on a political island, being a declined estate, being really a moderate person, but I got news for you. When you know what hits the fan, both sides do call me. The longest period of time I've stayed up consecutively in my life was over 60 hours in 2020 when I helped co-write the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program. I crashed after that. It was a pretty long week and I got pretty sick, but it is what it is. My microeconomic practice really focuses on suburban and rural economies, agriculture, renewable energy, professional sports and music festivals, banking and small business lending. Do a lot of work with government as well. And I am proudly in my 16th year as part of the SCAG Economic Bench. All right, 3 slides of the intersection of immigration and the economy before we get into the mess. I'm going to talk a little bit about H-2A visas, temporary worker visa. And I purposely made these slides wordy because you have a lot of people who've come into this program online and remotely. And I think it's good that they get to see kind of this information and they're not scrambling to make notes. Most of you know the H-2A visa is a temporary worker program. You see a lot of those folks working in agriculture. And if you're somebody who attends the your county fair, and you see people working in food booths and things of that sort, that's also part of typically the H-2A program. It's a 1-year maximum, pretty minimal cost. In fact, the employer is ultimately responsible for picking up both their side of it and also the employee side. As of this new administration, there is an in-person interview that must be passed. The currently, there's about 375, maybe even closer to 400,000 H-2A visas. Interesting enough, the minimum wage for that in California is higher than the state minimum wage. It's about $20 an hour. All right. The H-1B visa, I know it's gotten absolutely no media coverage in the last couple of weeks. But that's typically for highly educated and highly skilled folks. It's a 3-year visa. It's renewable for additional 3 years. It's actually the way that my wife's family came to this country. I'm married to a first-generation immigrant. And it makes it look like I'm smart because I was a collegiate athlete, but we met in quantitative analysis of all places. So there's a cap of 85,000 H-1Bs annually, new ones, and that's been a steady cap throughout multiple administrations. Interestingly enough, the denial rate during Trump's previous administration was about 15%. During Biden's administration is about 3%. The current total in country is about 730,000 people in the H-1B. You can see the average wage. That first year it's a little lower, but years 2 through 6, it's about $130,000. Total wages earned as of 2024 under that H-1B program for that year was over $90 billion. It's a pretty significant contribution to the economy. And you can see there the top countries, pretty obvious. And of course, the top employers kind of mirror the top employers in the United States. The field of studies, of course, that folks are coming in on are computer related engineering, education, medicine, and some administration as well. All right, last slide on this. This is where it gets fun. You've learned today that birth rates among all demographic groups in the U.S. are down. We are going to rely on immigration as a country to propel our economy. We have to. We don't have a choice unless we're somehow going to increase our birth rates. Well, I'm going to use California as an example of this intersection of immigration and the economy. 39 million people live here. Our unemployment rate's currently 5.5%. That means there's 1.1 million people in California in the workforce unemployed. 1.1 million. Keep that in the back of your mind. There's 2.6 million undocumented illegal immigrants in California. 1.6 million of them are in the workforce, which means if President Trump got his wish, helicopters came down right now, and I know we're sitting in downtown LA, which was the the hot spot a few months back, and removed every illegal immigrant, we would have 500,000 less people in our labor force than we do jobs. Explain to me how that does not destroy our economy in California. We have a vested interest as Californians in helping fix this disaster. All right. The mess. I was in high school in 1986 when the Immigration Reform Control Act was passed. It was done on a bipartisan basis. President Reagan and Tip O'Neill got together. I actually longed for the days when a Bill Clinton and a Newt Gingrich can get in a room and figure it out, as President Reagan and Tip O'Neill did. Didn't mean they didn't say bad things about each other publicly, but privately, they would figure it out. And I think most of us respect that. In fact, the Immigration Reform Act was passed on a very bipartisan level, and you can see that by the votes. Created what was then an amnesty program, and of course the I-9 identification program. All right, interesting enough, it's been 40 years since this occurred. That's 10 presidential terms, 5 of which were held by Democrats, 5 of which are held by Republicans. Well, let's talk about where we're at today. Tom Homan is running around saying, you know, deport all illegal immigrants. Saw him again on TV last night. And Governor Newsom is running around saying California is a sanctuary state. I'm pausing on purpose. This mess we're in is the fault of both Democrats and Republicans. Both. They've let us down. They broke the promise of 1986. And both sides are stuck in their base doctrine ideology. It's a disaster, and we're watching it. I personally was walking into a Home Depot in Encinitas, California, near where my wife and I summer in August. I couldn't believe what I saw when I'd walked into that Home Depot. And I think you all can visualize it if you've seen it on the news. But to experience it firsthand was really wild. All right, let's go into the fix. I'm a big believer, too, that if you're going to bring up a problem, you darn well better be able to help people fix it. Comey, I'm going to look at you for a second, sir, because I'm going to start at the bottom. You're the largest MPO in the nation. You say that proudly, correct? Yeah. You represent 6% of this nation's economy. That's a pretty sizable amount of people. Your elected officials, your RC, need to throw their weight around. They need to do it in a bipartisan way, and they need to do it pragmatically. Now, I'm not here to tell your elected officials what the fix should be, but I am here to suggest how we can do it. One is we can close and secure the borders. That's already been done, by the way. If you look at the numbers of people coming across the border under this new administration, it's very low, both legal and illegal. By the way, border crossings as a whole are down significantly. I represent border regions, including San Diego and Imperial County. We need straightforward, definable, working immigration system. Our immigration system on the legal side doesn't work right now, and it hasn't in a long time. But if somebody's seeking, whether it's asylum, citizenship, a green card, visa, the various visas, we need a system that works. We can use economic analytics to help us determine how much of a labor force we need and how much we can absorb, again, as compassionate people. We need to determine standards for those already in the United States illegally or undocumented, based on time and country, their contributions to the community, and limited legal issues. Getting a parking ticket shouldn't disqualify you from citizenship or a path to residency. But I think we can all agree the bad actors need to go, and there are some bad actors out there. Comey, this is my last slide, but it is a call to action, because the reality is when you represent 6%, you, and I'm looking at your elected officials, of the nation's population, you can throw your weight around. And right now, California's economy and the national economy are depending on you.
Thank you so much for that one. Next one. Thank you so much, Mike. Up next, we'll have Miriam, who will also be presenting.
Thank you all for having me. It's really an honor. I feel a little bit out of my depth here, but I have always been very interested in the intersection of immigration and demographics. I've been reporting on immigration mainly from a grassroots perspective for about 2 decades now. I'm embarrassed to admit. Back in 2007, I interviewed Dow Myers for a story that was titled Boomers' Good Life Tied to Better Life for Immigrants. And he said something that struck with me. He said, immigrants and baby boomers are 2 groups whose destinies will converge over the next 20 years. He predicted that baby boomers would begin stepping back from the workforce, and immigrants and their children would become the labor force and the tax base that keeps our economy moving. Well, here we are, and the shift is happening before our eyes. That 2007 article reminded me of an elderly Mexican gardener in my neighborhood who benefited from the last amnesty program that Congress passed back in 1986. And by the way, he's now carrying his green card in his truck for the first time since he obtained it. What's illustrative is the story of his 4 children, all US born. They've entered the middle class, they've bought homes, 3 have college degrees, 1 is in the military. His youngest, a 28-year-old daughter, graduated from medical school in June and now works in an emergency room. Most likely, she's taking the place of a baby boomer doctor who is ready to step away from the graveyard shifts. This is what Dow Myers has been talking about. But given the current immigration enforcement crackdown, I can't help but wonder, without getting political, what are the broader consequences? Not just the moral costs, which are real, but also the economic ones, especially for boomers and for our country's future growth and innovation. Over the years, I've met immigrants from all walks of life, and almost all of them came here for one reason: to work. Blue collar or white collar, that hasn't changed. What has changed is where people are coming from. Before the rise of the internet, smartphones, and social media, most people crossing the border were from nearby, Mexico or Central America. But in recent years, I've encountered newcomers from the Caribbean, South America, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, not just along the border, of course, but then deep inside the country where there are jobs. I know this is all about California, but there's one place I've been visiting with some frequency over the last year, and it's a town called Springfield, Ohio. Well, it's called Springfield in Ohio. It has a population of about 60,000 people. Springfield was once a booming manufacturing city, sometimes called a mini Chicago. But over the years, it lost population, its economy started to shrink. So local business leaders in the chamber decided to develop a plan to revive it. They leveraged the town's strategic location between Dayton and Columbus, right off the freeway. It had good vocational school, colleges. The chamber and the city offered incentives to attract companies like Amazon, Honda, Dole to build plants there. And they did, but there was one problem: not enough workers to fill the jobs, or workers willing to stay in the jobs. So then came the Haitians. Starting around 2020 or 2021, word began to spread. Jobs were available, plentiful. The pay was decent, and the cost of living was low. So Haitians started to trickle in. They told their friends and their family. And by 2023, 2024, thousands of Haitians had arrived to this town of 60,000, some straight from the border, others from places like Florida, New Jersey, New York. Many of these Haitian migrants were able to work legally under temporary programs introduced during the Biden administration, and employers were thrilled. These were reliable, hardworking employees, many eager to take on overtime, but not everyone in the Springfield community was welcoming. Some longtime residents resented what they perceived as special treatment for the newcomers. Rents began to rise. Non-English speaking students were suddenly in classrooms. The local federally qualified clinic had longer wait times. When I first visited Springfield, I thought it would make for an interesting case study in how a small city integrates a large immigrant population in a short amount of time. I never expected that it would become a flashpoint in the presidential campaign, which it did literally weeks after I published the first story out of Springfield. But then came the false rumors amplified by J.D. Vance and Donald Trump that Haitian immigrants were stealing pets and eating them. There were bomb threats, schools had to close, white supremacists marched. I kept visiting Springfield, and the Haitians kept working quietly, diligently, sending money home, raising families, and hoping things would calm down. Before Christmas last year, I got a hold of a memo that Amazon distributed to the workers at that plant which depends on Haitian workers, saying that it was the most efficient Amazon plant in the country. And I wrote a story about how these Haitian immigrants were helping make sure Santa arrived on time to hundreds of thousands of Americans. In addition, many of these Haitians who Americans were griping about had managed to save and buy homes. Their kids were in school, playing soccer, marching in the high school band. They were attending church with fellow Christian Americans. But then came the policy changes. Then came Trump. When Trump returned to power, his administration began dismantling the temporary statuses that had allowed many Haitians to work legally. In July, hundreds lost their jobs. Amazon began texting former Amazon employees, Americans who hadn't stayed on the job, begging them to come back. No interview or resume was needed. And that's just the beginning. Come February, thousands more will lose temporary protected status, and with it, the right to work. Some Haitians are already leaving, heading to Canada or back to South America. Others are preparing to live underground because there's no way they're going to return to Haiti, a country that's run by thugs. They're hoping to survive in the informal economy and hoping that immigration sweeps like the ones that have been happening in Chicago and LA won't arrive there. But what's clear is that Springfield and its economy will struggle. Even Ohio's Republican governor told me it's not going to be good. Closer to home, here in Southern California, I recently witnessed one of the most gut-wrenching moments in my reporting career. A landscaper, undocumented in the US for 31 of his 48 years, was surrounded by masked agents while trimming weeds at an IHOP. He's married to a US citizen. He's the father of 3 Marines. The agent slammed him to the ground and beat him, hurting him to the point that till this day, he can't lift his left arm. He's traumatized. I'm sorry to say that I think he's a broken man. He had no criminal record, just decades of work and family. Unfortunately, his case isn't rare. Arrests of longtime immigrants with deep US roots and no criminal history has surged across the country. It's no surprise that many immigrants are now leaving the US, both voluntarily and not, and fewer are coming. In August, I wrote about a Pew Research Center analysis of census data. It found that the foreign-born population in the US declined by nearly 1.5 million in just the first half of this year. In other words, we're now experiencing negative net migration. So I return to my question, Professor Myers, where does that leave us now? Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Up next, we have Manuel Pastor.
Thank you. So I drew the least controversial topic, sort of a profile of undocumented immigrants in LA County. Couple things I want to say before we dive into this. Michael gave a good picture of the H-2A, H-1B, and the undocumented workforce. But it's important to remember of the foreign-born, half are naturalized, born in other countries, but U.S. citizens. Of the remaining half, about half have green cards and about half are undocumented. Those shares differ a little bit depending on the state, but that's basically the picture. And while the controversy focuses in on this 1/4 of the population, remember that it's 1/4 of the population, often with a lot of different statuses. Some statuses like DACA, they give people some permission to work. TPS, temporary protected status, that the Asians have, they can be removed at any time. So I want to look at what this looks like in LA County from estimates we just did. I always like to let people know before I start speaking that if my voice sounds a little harsh, you might think it's because I joined Michael in screaming at pundits on television who don't know what they're talking about. Uh, that's true. But it's also the case that I have a voice condition called spasmodic dysphonia, spasms around the voice box, makes your voice change. It's the condition that's been made famous by Robert Kennedy Jr. You know, when he speaks, his voice is very scratchy. So if my voice was not treated, uh, I would sound like Robert Kennedy Jr. I would not be as delusional as Robert Kennedy Jr. And it is treated once a month. This is true with Botox, which is why I look so damn good. So when we look at the data, again, about a third of LA County's residents are immigrants, foreign born. Of that, about a quarter, a little bit around 950,000 are undocumented. For the nerds among you, how is this figure arrived at? There's a set of methodologies that are common across 3 or 4 different estimation methods that have to do with taking a look at the presence of immigrants in census data, like the American Community Survey, and then sort of subtracting away people, of course, who are naturalized, but also people who we know have green cards, and then looking at the remainder as being likely to be amongst the undocumented. And then that's usually coupled, this is how we do it too, with a probability model, which takes a look at various characteristics that are associated with people being undocumented and applying that probability model to the American Community Survey to come up with these individual estimates and profiles. For those of you who enjoyed it, you are my people. What I just said. For those of you who got lost, oh well. Now back to the overall profile. So of the about 950,000 undocumented immigrants in LA County, about a third are of Mexican ancestry. Most people think it's all of the undocumented. Then you move to Central Americans. And what's quite interesting is how that has changed. So now we have more Chinese, Filipino, Korean, Indian, Armenian, and other undocumented immigrants from different countries. As Miriam was saying, the population has become more diverse, particularly in recent years, because most of the arrivals at the border have been not Mexican, but to some degree Central American, but also Asian, African, Venezuelan, from other countries that are much more recent. Another thing about this is that most of the nation's recent immigrants are not coming any longer to California. It used to be in 1980 that about a third of all the recent arrivals of immigrants who came to the United States settled in California. Now, only about 15% of the recent immigrants are settling in California. They're not going to other traditional entry points like New York or Illinois. They're going to places like Texas and Florida, where the reception might be more hostile, where you can buy a house and experience low rents. The elsewhere is places like Ohio and the South of the United States. Now, this is really important because while the undocumented population in the US probably grew by around 25% between 20 and 2024, that's not what happened in LA County. In LA County, the undocumented population only grew by around 15%. So what's happening is this population is arriving in parts of the country that never saw immigrants before and cannot imagine the joy of a Korean taco truck, which is waiting for you at the end of this rainbow. Instead, what there is a lot of shock, a lot of dismay, but it also means that we in LA County are not experiencing some of the disruption that other places are experiencing. Partly because we've got a lot of immigrants already, partly because people aren't coming here as much. But that also means that if you think about it, that our undocumented population is far more likely to have been in the country for a long time. And so, in fact, about 75% of undocumented immigrants in LA County have been in the country for longer than a decade. They are much more likely to have settled deeply into our communities, our faith institutions, our businesses, and our social fabric. And you can see this, I just talked about that data. If you looking at undocumented Angelenos, US citizens who are family members who live with undocumented family members, and green card holders who are living with undocumented family members. And what this shows you is that there are in fact more family members who are US citizens, like the Marine father's spouse or kids, and green card holders that are actually undocumented immigrants, at least in LA County. And that means that each person who is picked up and deported, you're much more likely in LA County to be disrupting a business, shattering a family, having an impact on a community. Now, it's also the case that that means that about a fifth of our county, it's a little bit lower for the SCAG region as a whole, is either undocumented themselves or living with an undocumented family member. And while the Trump administration, when they announced their step up in deportation, said that what they were doing was targeting the worst of the worst, the bad actors that Michael talked about, where there might be agreement on removal, that rather than taking a targeted approach, they took a target rich approach. They came to a place where there were a lot of undocumented that you could pick up at Home Depot or at a coffee shop or somewhere else that would be a lot easier for them to meet their numbers. This has impact on children. And this just is something that you think you already probably know, which is that undocumented immigrants, along with other immigrants, contribute to our economy. In LA County, it's a spending power of about 20 billion. They contribute mightily to federal taxes. The interesting thing and worth debate is that they're net contributors to the federal coffers, but they're net users of local dollars. That is, most of the services that they use are health clinics, which are funded locally, schools for their children, but their dollars go up to the federal government. And in fact, somewhere between $6 and $8 billion a year go from undocumented workers to Social Security to feed that. So that fiscal thing is a topic also worthy of real debate rather than the fake debates that we tend to have. The last slide that I want to end on, and these numbers are probably a little bit high because of our estimation technique. We're had to do this pretty quickly. We're sort of trying to clean it up a little bit, but at a lower bound, 35% of the frontline construction workers are undocumented. We are not recovering from the fires in the context of this deportation regime. If you move to food preparation and serving, it's about 21%. We are not staging the Olympics if we do not have a more stable situation for undocumented workers. And I want to just end on one stark contradiction, which I think is really key. We have a rising dependency ratio that Professor Myers, my good friend, has talked about for years, meaning the old will rely on workers in the middle. But more than that, abstractly, elders rely on immigrant care. And some of that is green card holders. Some of that is folks who lack papers. And one thing I've been continually struck by, and I'm in the same boat as a lot of you, they're the only people, aside from my kids, and I don't trust them, that have the keys to our house and the codes to our alarm are the people who clean our house. You can guess their documentation status. And it's probably true of a lot of you that you trust your children, you trust your elders, you trust your home with people who are being demonized and pushed out. And asking how we live with that contradiction of a tremendous trust, because people may have tapped into this labor initially because they thought it was cheap, and then they realized it was reliable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manuel. As you guys can see, we have a diversity um, of, I would say, disciplines up here, just having a conversation about the impacts that these immigration policies have had on the nation, also on the state of California. You know, the state of California is the fourth largest economy in the world. And when the topic of immigration is brought up, you know, you cannot ignore that this is a population that has interwoven itself into the fabric of our nation. I would argue it's not something that is during the Trump administration. I mean, Mike talked about, you know, 10 presidents, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats. And so this is an issue that it's, you know, our nation was founded by immigrants, and it is a part of who we are as Americans. Narrative is very important. I know Mike started with the Padres. I see what he did there. You start at the bottom, the only way up after that is up, right? Was that the strategy?
Yeah. Um, no, hopefully we'll get a win today and force this thing to tomorrow. But look, what's interesting is this. I followed this topic. I mean, one of the regions I handle is Imperial County. So if any of you are going to eat anything at the buffet at the lunch today that's green or a carrot, it came from there. And I'll bet you as much money as any of you want to put on the table, and I like making money, that it was harvested by an immigrant, legal, illegal, or otherwise. I don't think people in this room are advocating, by and large, for illegal immigration. They were advocating for fix the damn thing somehow. And recognize that there are people here that are already doing a job. Now I'm going to say it. Any of you South Park fans, and if you're not, then I won't even say it. South Park fans, Eric Cartman about 20 years ago in an episode said, can we get rid of all the Mexicans? No. They're interwoven into our economy, as are every other ethnic group that has chosen to pursue what we call the American dream. Now let's fix this. Let's fix this in a pragmatic way that is fair to the people that are here, the people that want to come here, and the people that want to contribute to what we call the great experiment of democracy. I think that's what people are actually advocating. And again, Comey, your RC is going to really have some heavy lifting on this topic, and they're going to have to do it, because I'll tell you what, there probably is not a wider diversity of folks in this country that can come together that are in theory nonpartisan, in theory, meaning elected officials at the local level are not partisan technically, that can now push Washington to get to an approach that fixes this.
Thank you. There was a question there, but you jumped the gun a little bit. But I think what I'm trying to get at is this: when this started, when the raids, when the deportation campaign started, right? We had just interesting narratives are out there. I would say this: the president of the United States, and you talk about now the funding. You have $75 billion that's being redirected, 45 billion that was added to detainment facilities. So there's a huge influx of funding when it comes to deporting, when it comes to, I would say, the inflicting violence on Black and brown bodies as it's perceived. But my question is this: if the President of the United States changed his mind when the initial raid started and said, no, we're not going to do hotel workers, we're not going to do restaurant workers, we're not going to do field workers, and then insert Stephen Miller, and then the president steps back, right? And everything continues as usual. Stephen Miller had, I know you put Tom Homan up there, but Stephen Miller had the power to make the president of the United States back off from changing a policy that he said he was going to consider. And and so my thing is, with that in mind, and your perspective field, what narrative, whether it's economic, whether it's framing of the media, whether it's demographic or population based, what narrative, and this is a question for the whole panel, and after that we'll let the audience, what narrative do you adopt that breaks through, that breaches that mindset, considering what I just told you about the initial, we're going to change this, but then insert Stephen Miller, now nothing's going to happen. And if you want, we can start off with Manuel. Will work our way this way.
Thanks, and I'll say something, then I'll ask a question. So I think that our traditional political debates in the United States have been sort of around individualism versus collectivism. Do we believe in individual initiative, small businesses, markets, limited government, versus do we think more about the role of the government, unions and corporations, sort of collective responses? But I would submit that what's happened is that the new debate is tribalism versus mutuality. It's about protecting a group against other groups versus seeing interdependence. And I think that perhaps in Southern California, there's many reasons why Mike is saying SCAG's regional council should stand up. But I think part of it is that this is a place that recognizes interdependence, that we're not going to be able to move forward without this population. That is not only an important part of contributing right now, but an important part of so many of our stories. My dad was an undocumented immigrant. I have an endowed chair at USC. Go figure, right? But that's an important part of all of our stories. And there's a sense of how do we depend on one another? How do we have mutuality? The question I want to pose, everybody can answer Arturo's question, is one thing that's really striking to me. This is for Arturo, is that we normally think about immigration raids happening in big cities. But one of the things that's been super interesting is Paramount, Huntington Park, that really our suburbs are as immigrant as our city. They're as diverse as our city. They face the same problems as our city. And one thing that's been very interesting is that while the city might have been geared up to think about deportation and resistance, you've got a lot of small jurisdictions that have never had to step in the way that they are stepping in right now to protect their businesses, to protect their people, to protect the trust that they've built with people who live in Huntington Park, who may not be citizens, who may not have legal status, but nonetheless have been contributing members of the community. So I'm really curious, everybody else can answer Arturo's question, but if Arturo could talk to us a little bit about how small jurisdictions are grappling with a problem that's usually been the bailiwick of large jurisdictions.
I'll chime in at that. On that. Miriam, just which narrative do you think? Sorry. I mean, what narrative do you think breaks
there's
through?
no, I mean, as a storyteller, what I definitely find is that when I write stories that focus on individuals, like the story about the father of the Marines, I mean, of course, it was a long story. I invested a lot of time, but that story made so much more impact than writing a story about thousands of, undocumented immigrants being arrested by, Border Patrol agents and ICE in LA. I mean, I think personalizing this issue is what really illuminates it for readers. I mean, just judging from the hundreds of responses that I got from readers to that story, as opposed to writing a story about, oh, immigrants can't get bond and they're now stuck in detention, which is supremely important that, the Trump administration now is not allowing people who are detained, even if they don't have a criminal record, even if they've been in this country for decades, to be bonded out of detention like this landscaper Gardner was. Like, he could still be sitting there right now because shortly after it was released, they introduced this policy. And that's kind of boring stuff. And it's important, but it's hard to really like get readers engaged. So as a storyteller, I focus on people and, amplifying their stories. I mean, in terms of Stephen Miller, I think he's a lost cause. Like, I mean, we can't expect Stephen Miller to change his mind. I mean, he's the architect of this, and he's the engine that's, ensuring that it continues to move forward.
Thank you, Mayor. Mike?
I actually think it could be simple because it's what's the message that's going to change the mind. And Donald Trump is a capitalist. He speaks to what speaks to him is money and the economy. So when his base starts to say, wait a minute, we can't make as much money because we don't have the labor, that's when he is going to change his mind. His influence group, everybody in here has an influence group. Well, his influence group are businesses. And if the focus is saying, okay, well, wait a minute, we know what's going on is wrong. I think most people tell you that. I know some people, they're hard right, who tell me it's wrong. Okay, great. Now, how do we change that? And I think that change is going to be speaking his language, which is an economic language, to say we need a labor force. We need people who are doing this, this, and this, and we need this escalator to work correctly. And that's probably going to be what gets him to understand that there might be a more pragmatic approach. And again, I am not sitting here advocating for illegal immigration. I'm sitting here advocating for we need to fix it if we want a robust economy in our country.
Thank you, Mike. I want to say I'm also not advocating for illegal immigration. I'm just advocating for my residents not to get their door blown off over a fender bender. But I'll open it up to the audience, and then at the end, I'll chime in on Manuel. I'll chime in on the question you had for me. So we'll go ahead and open up for the audience. If you guys have any questions, you can walk up to the podium, or if you're sitting in front of a microphone, you can push your button. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. First and foremost, again, Vice Mayor Daniel Ramos from the amazing city of Adelanto. Thank you to all the panelists. Appreciate all your comments. No questions. Three quick comments to Mr. Michael Bracken there. First, I agree with you, Mayor. Mike, I apologize, and I'm sorry that you're a Padres fan, man. I don't know what you were thinking. What I am willing to put on the table is a bet that they'll lose tonight to the Cubs. Right? Go Dodgers. Second, for those of you who are new to SCAG or aren't too familiar with SCAG, our region includes 191 cities, 6 major counties, 16 federally recognized tribal governments, and about 19 plus million residents. So you're correct. We are the largest MPO in the country based off land and population. But not only are we the largest, we're the greatest, right? We are the greatest MPO in the country. And you're right when you say it's going to take the RC to step up and really, make some noise and shake the tree up. And I look around the room and there's a few RC members, including myself, Jenny Crosswhite here. And I think it's safe to say that we're going to accept that challenge. We're going to embrace that challenge, and we will step up to the plate. We're the greatest because of the leadership here at SCAG, from the bottom all the way up to the top. So we're going to welcome that challenge. Lastly, I appreciate your comments, Mike. I appreciate your comments on the transparency when you put both sides on blast, right? And you put both sides on notice, because it's going to take both sides to fix the problem, and not just state the problem, but come to the table with a solution, right? The solution is not get rid of everybody and keep everybody. there is a healthy balance. So I appreciate your comments, your transparency, and just being honest with everything that you said. Go Dodgers.
Any additional, okay, we have somebody at the podium. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Karina Quintanilla. I am a council member in the city of Palm Desert. Good to see you, Mayor. It's been a little bit of time. My question is, how do we make the dollars make sense? When Latinos have a $3.2 trillion impact and purchasing power in the United States, which would put the Latino spending power at about the 5th largest GDP globally. And I don't know how many of you here have gone to the fashion district, but I was there yesterday and my heart broke. For every business that was open, we counted 7, 8, 9 that were closed, shuttered, completely shuttered, closed for lease, for sale. People selling their mannequins, their displays, their racks, or the ones that were open, only their employees were there. I was there for 2 hours and didn't bump elbows, did not touch a single person on the sidewalk. Wow. And I've been going there for 30 years. The tariffs aren't hurting businesses. The tariffs aren't hurting countries. They're hurting the people that work here. They're hurting the consumers and people from all over Southern California that are coming to shop there. So how can we tell that story in a way that's compelling to say, you're not just targeting individuals, here's the larger ripple effect? How do we tell that story?
Yeah, first of all, I happen to be a resident in your city, council member, so welcome. I think part of the narrative that you began with is not complete, and I don't say that disrespectfully to you. This should not be a Latino or Hispanic immigrant story. This needs to be the melting pot story. Because there are parts of this country that, you know, immigration and migration hasn't occurred a whole lot. I have family in Oklahoma and I can tell you stories. But we need to make sure we're telling the stories of how all immigrants from all of these various nations are contributing to our economy in order to generate the fix. Again, Trump speaks capitalism. I speak capitalism. And I'm a big believer in capitalism for anybody who spent 5 minutes with me. But that story is probably going to have to be told on a more global sense and specific to the contributions of all immigrants. And then we can get into how we fix the immigration policy.
And then Manoj, just if you want to chime in, you talked about diversity of households. And so maybe how does that play into if a business is being impacted? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a business, how would I say this? An area that has a diversity of businesses and you know, you impact somebody that has not just an immigrant or undocumented person living there, but 4, 5, 6 different family members.
Yeah, I do think that this term ripple effects, rippling across families, rippling across businesses, rippling across communities. The Palisades is not going to rebuild quickly. If this labor force is stripped away, fearful of showing up in that area, that'll impact Altadena as well. I've got to say, however, the outlines of immigration reform, more secure borders, regularization, some kind of way of the undocumented population that is here, and setting up more flows for the future that are legal, because we know we can absorb this many undocumented people, we can clearly absorb a legal flow that would be more orderly. That's been clear for 20 years. So we really need to ask ourselves, why is this message not breaking through? And why in this particular moment has the point become not just fixing a problem, but cruelty? I think there are some people who look at what's going on and feel like, oh, we're giving these illegals their due for having snuck into the country, instead of thinking about the whole kind of interdependence and stories that I think need to be there. I mean, the ability to imagine that the Haitians recuperating your town are eating your pets speaks to a deep sickness within us that's moral and spiritual. And I do think the economic arguments are important. We need to figure out what is wrong with us.
Thank you, Mano. And I think we're out of time. A round of applause for the panel here. And I did want to say, I know Manoa had asked me a question earlier. For us as a local small municipalities, and I think he hit the nail right on the head. As much as they try to hyper politicize this issue and inject partisanship into it, what we have to understand is that regardless of what fights are happening at the national level with, Governor Gavin Newsom, who's running for president, and President Trump, who's systematically targeting the California economy, the reality is that, and I keep reminding residents and in Huntington Park and in other small cities, is that regardless of what those narratives are, you should not carry those narratives, especially if they dehumanize people, especially if they dehumanize your neighbors. My neighbor's Wi-Fi name is I Love Trump. But I tell you that if something were to happen to my neighbor, I'd be the first person there to defend and protect them, regardless of what their views are. And I think we cannot let that escape us. So with that being said, I'll cut those comments short, and Comey, I'll let you, floor is yours.
Thank you. How about another hand for the panel? Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Flores and the panel. This has been a very invigorating panel. We heard of Prophet Myers, I think is what Miriam said. He prophesied that there would be this intersection between immigrants and baby boomers, and you laid out that story excellently. And we had the Bracken Challenge on SCAG fixing immigration. That's going to be a tough one because immigration is not typically on our agenda at the SCAG RC, but we can definitely inform decision making that would help us get to a better future in this community. And of course, we appreciate Dr. Pastor's data sets and analysis of the which sort of kind of give us a punch on the impact of immigration to our region. Why this is a very compelling and interesting topic for us to deal with today. So again, I want to thank the last panel. I want to thank all the 3 panels that have graced us today. It's been a very interesting conversation. And also want to reiterate our thanks for our partners from Census and the Department of Finance, and of course USC Price School of Public Policy, and all the other panelists that have graced today's stage.